Hello and welcome back for another day in pre-calc. Today we're going to kind of examine the midpoint and what that is. Okay, so midpoint, lots of you guys can probably infer what this means. It's basically just the middle point between two other points. Okay, so if we're trying to find the midpoint here, if we look at this picture, with these 2 points, the midpoint is somewhere in between, and not just anywhere along that line, but directly in the middle. Okay, so in our case here, it's going to be right about there. Okay, so it's the middle point between 2 points. All right, now it's important when talking about the distance and the midpoint. Over here, if you look, what's the difference between these two things? Okay, so if we think about it, distance is like a length or a number, okay? That's always going to be positive, but it kind of gives us a length or the number that represents how far it is from one point to the other. Okay? Now the midpoint is specifically a location, okay? So this is an exact location. That's going to be like our XY coordinate. So the midpoint will be an XY coordinate that specifically tells us where it's at. So what we mean by that, the distance of this line from the first point over to the second point, if we want, you could count them, or just figure it out, 4 minus -6. Either way, your distance is going to be 10. Okay, now you know that your midpoint, well, 10 divided by 2 is 5. However, your midpoint is not 5. Your midpoint, rather, is a specific spot. Where does this midpoint occur? Where will it be 5 from to either end? And that's right here. Okay, so it's got a measurement of 5 on each side of that, so that's the midpoint. In our case, the xy coordinate will be -1 up 2. We'll say that as an ordered pair, so -1, 2. And that is our midpoint on that first example. Now, when you're given a picture like that, okay, sometimes it's really easy when it's horizontal or vertical. Okay, however, other times it won't be quite as easy if they're kind of diagonal from each other, forming a slant. Okay, so to deal with that, we can use the midpoint formula. So to use the midpoint formula, we simply take our x values and we add them together, and then we divide them by 2. Okay, then we also take, that gives us our x coordinate, our y values, and add them together and divide by 2, and that will give us our y coordinate. Okay, so when we're looking to solve this problem, the first thing we should do is, it says find the midpoints between points A and B. So first we need to identify what are the coordinates of A and B. So A is over 1 to the right, up 5, so that will have a coordinate of 1, 5. B is over 5, down 3, or 5, -3. Okay. Now from here, we can simply plug them into our formula. So we'll add the x coordinates together. So we'll do 1 plus 5, divide that by 2. Okay, so 1 plus 5 is the same as 6. 6 divided by 2 gives us 3, and that is our x coordinate. And we also need to find our y coordinate, which will be 5 plus -3 divided by 2. Okay, 5 plus -3 leaves us 2 divided by 2, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 3, 1 is our coordinates. So we go over 3, up 1, and that point right there is the midpoint. Now, if you ever want to check it, just start at A, and we go down 1, 2, 3, 4, right 2. So if it's the midpoint, we should have to do the same thing to get to point B. So down 1, 2, 3, 4, right 2. And so since it is down 4 over 2, down 4 over 2, we know that this point right there is our midpoint. Okay, now on this next one, example 2, there's no graph. You have two options. You can either graph those 2 points and kind of figure it out using reasoning. However, this formula will also work. Okay, so if we take our x values and we'll do 10 plus 7 divided by 2, that's going to be our x value. And then we'll do negative 2 plus 4 divided by 2 to get our y value. Now keep in mind, 10 plus 7 is 17, 17 over 2. Some of you might be thinking, that's a decimal. That's okay. We don't know that it's always going to come out perfectly for us, okay? So if you do that on the calculator, you'll get 8.5. And over here, negative 2 plus 4 will give us 2. 2 over 2 is the same as 1. So right down there at the bottom, we got our answer of 8.5, 1. All right, so go ahead and flip it over to the back. And sometimes, instead of finding the midpoint, you're going to have the midpoint and one of the endpoints, and you have to find the other endpoint. Okay, so here, example 3 says the midpoint is negative 3, 5. If one of the endpoints is 1, 6, find the other endpoint. Now, there are 3 different ways we can do this. I mean, possibly others, but 3 main ways that we can do this. Okay, so the first way is going to be to use slope. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So we know that the initial midpoint, or the midpoint, is negative 3, 5. So we go left 3, up 5. And I'm going to label that with an M because that is our midpoint. Now, one of our endpoints is over here at 1, 6. So 1, 6, right about there. Okay, now this is kind of what I was talking about before. If this is truly the midpoint, we know that it will follow the same slope from the endpoint to the midpoint. It'll have to be the same exact thing, rise over run, to get to that next endpoint. So in our case here, it'd be down 1 and left 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so down 1, left 4. And another way to do that from here, down 1, left 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that will be right there. That is our endpoint. And from here, you just count it up. So left 7, up 4. So we know our answer will be negative 7, 4. Okay, now that was done by graphing and then checking the slope. Okay, you also could solve using the equation. However, if you're going to use the equation, you need to be careful, because it's not going to be quite the same as what we did on the other side. Okay, we'll use the coordinates and we'll plug them in to the equation. Now remember, on the other side, we said x1 plus x2 divided by 2 equals our midpoint. So in our case here, we know it will be the x value, 1, which we get from right here. Okay, but I don't know what x2 is. So 1 plus x2 divided by 2, that's going to equal whatever the midpoint is, which in our case is negative 3. Okay, so if we do this, in order to solve, we're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. We'll be left with 1 plus x2 equals negative 6. Subtract the 1 over, and x2 equals negative 7. Okay, then likewise, we can do the same thing with our y values. Okay, except this time we're going to use 6 and the 5. So it'd be 6 plus y2 divided by 2, all that equals 5. Okay, so in the same way now, we're going to multiply that by 2, multiply the other side by 2, and we'll be left with 6 plus y2 equals 10. Okay, from here we'll subtract the 6, we'll be left with y2 equals 4. And as you can see, our coordinate is -7, 4. The exact same coordinate that we had over here. Okay, now the third way, there's one other way, and this one's kind of reasoning through it. Okay, so for this one, it's almost more of a flowchart method, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So for this flowchart method, always start with your midpoint. Okay, so the flowchart method, or sorry, I misspoke. Always start with your endpoint. For this flowchart method, we know it starts at 1, 6, and from there it goes to -3, 5. And then from there it goes to some other spot. Okay, now first think about the x. To get from 1 here to -3, what change has to happen? And hopefully you know it has to subtract 4. So we know the same thing is going to happen here. If we subtract 4 again, we'll have -7. Okay, over here on the y value, to get from 6 to 5, it's going to subtract 1. So therefore, from 5 to the next one, it will also have to subtract 1. 5 minus 1 gives us 4. And that's the third way we can get -7, 4 as our value. All three of those give us the same exact answer. I don't care which of those three you use, as long as you are able to use one of them. Okay, now, down here, M is the midpoint between P1 and P2. Gives us M's coordinates and P2's coordinates. Now let's find P1. So I'm going to show us the flowchart one more time. So we know we got to start at our endpoint. So between these, the endpoint is P2. So it's going to be at -5, 4. Okay, and then the midpoint, which we'll put next, is 8, -7. And then we have some mystery coordinate that we don't know what it is yet. So to get from -5 to 8, to get there, we'd have to add 13. -5 plus 13 leaves us with 8. So we know that the next one will also be plus 13. Okay, 8 plus 13 gives us 21. So as you can see, we could have put this on the graph, but when they're kind of bigger numbers, it gets a little more difficult to do the graphing because your graph's probably not big enough. Okay, but it would have worked. Okay, now this next side, the y side, 4 to -7 to go there, it's subtracting 11. So we're going to have to do it again. Subtract 11, -7 minus -11. Okay, so if we have -7 and we subtract 11, I misspoke there. -7 minus 11 will result in -18. And we have the coordinate 21, -18 as our answer. Okay. So once again, please attempt the review from the day. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Okay. And I will talk to you guys all later. Have a great day. Bye.